I'll lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside and study war no more. We were not the only ones who complained about exile. Even though the church had at one time become one with the Roman Empire, and therefore had no reason to say that it was in exile, nevertheless, if you come to a monastery and you hear at the end of the day of Compline, when they're chanting, Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae. And what are they pleading for? Have pity on us, exiled children of Eve. You have the sense of the sadness that is there. Think about Buddhists when they get the feel of what dukkha is about. Or you talk to a Sufi about dunya. We all have a place in which we see the dark situation and we say, this is not how it is meant to be. In Hinduism, we are now in Kali Yuga, a very dark time, a compressed time. And it is at such times that while they don't talk about a Messiah, they still talk about avatars, and they say that I read the Gita in a wonderful Hebrew translation, so that's how it comes to me. When evil gets too strong and righteousness falls down, put on a body in my magic and appeared to save things, to raise the level. That there too is a feeling that there is someone awaited who can come and who can help us. What was envisioned that we should experience? I'll lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside and study war no more. And the lion and the lamb will lie down, and the child will play at the place of the serpent and not be afraid. Lo yareu velo yashchitu b'chol har kodshi. They will not do any evil, they will not destroy in all my holy mountain, for the world will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea. You hear promises of this sort in our culture. If you were to talk to Hopis, you would hear that they too have prophecies and promises that things will turn. And in fact, the expectation is that now is about the time when they'll begin to turn. I had a visit from a person who works with the shamans from Alaska down to Chile, who was telling me about how these people are working with ceremonies and with rituals on the subtle plane to help bring about the shift. So you hear that wherever people are, that there are these experiences and these feelings. It's got to be better than it is. We can't allow it to be that way. What else will happen? Well, peace on earth and goodwill to all. You get the idea. We are now in the Advent season. This will be part and parcel of the Christmas celebration. The hope that there will be someone who comes and he will just catapult us into another place. And what else will happen? Uvau ha'ovdim be'eretz Ashur ve'hanidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim. That people will come back, those who have been lost will find their way back to their roots, and they will all come to God's holy mountain. and my house shall be a house of prayer for all peoples. When you hear prophecies and promises of this sort, it feels, yes, I want it. I want it. How is he described? That one. Ani rochiv ala chamor. A humble person he will ride on a donkey, and he'll make his entrance to us and announce himself. If you look at the pictures that have been painted by various painters of Palm Sunday, you have a sense of that. Most people talk about as if the greeting was, Hosanna, hey Zana, you know, yay, 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 but that's not what it meant. Please save us, please help us, you know. We need you to come, we need you to do this work. Even in Damascus, at this point, they still have someone with a white horse for the last Mahdi to appear. I once was blind and now can see. You get the idea? So the hope is that the scales will fall from the eyes, the ears will be able to hear, and not only the ears of the ears, but the ears of the heart will be able to hear that. And what else is going to happen? Not too long after that, there will be the resurrection of the dead. So you can imagine that as I was embedded very strongly in Orthodox Judaism, Hasidic Judaism, when I heard from my master that the Messiah is about to come, and we got hints about that time, it was to be in 1943. If you know what 1943 was, and there was a time of the ghetto uprising, it was the time of the greatest number of people being killed. Strange enough, I had a friend who cast a horoscope on the day that Dr. Hoffman discovered LSD, that it was identical with that day of the ghetto uprising. You know, strange, a door closes and another opens. There is the sense, if we go back to what he was saying, that prepare yourself, what you're seeing right now is that the exile is burning down. The exile is being burned to the ashes. What will remain afterwards will be the good life. Expect that. And when the day came, the year was over, that we had as the year 43, Tafshin Dalet, that the Messiah would be here, and it didn't happen. Tafshin Gimel, he said, the Messiah would be here, and it didn't happen. Something strange happened. People started to give all kinds of saying, well, maybe we didn't figure it right, you know, maybe something else has happened. I go into all this because I want you to understand something as to how we got to this place. Because despite the fact and despite all the troubles that we have, when we get back from the place of ouch, and we say, what would be the place when we don't feel the pain, when there is no ouch? What would that be like? We always come back to, this is not the way it should be. It ought to be different, okay? Take a look at what has happened to time. We are so driven in time. I once made the point to say that in the background of all this, there are now 2 gigahertz computers and more. Can you understand what this means? How many things happen per second now? How time is driven? And with all the labor-saving devices and everything else, how good it'll be if you can send a letter quickly from one place to the other, right, with email, and it'll save us time. Just the time we spend in eliminating the span, you know, each day is a pity. And you hear about Walmart saying that, yes, if you want to keep that job, then you have to work overtime and not get paid. And the more responsibility you have, the more you can't count on working only from 9 to 5. You have to take your work home and spend weekends and so on and so forth on it. It is difficult. And when we talk about, in our tradition, about how bad it was when we had to be slaves in Egypt, and you have the sense of the taskmasters driving the people, and not only do you have to deliver the amount of bricks, but you also now have to go and get the straw to bind the bricks together. And if you don't make that, your children will be put into the walls. You get a sense of the amount of, how would I say, taskmasters that are driving us. And if they don't drive us from the outside, the workaholic drives himself from the inside. And so, what is there that we can do? Do we ever get a sense of being able to go, now I don't have to do anymore. Thank God we have Shabbat, we have the Sabbath. And this is why we call the Sabbath Me'en Olam Haba. It is an echo of what the world to come is going to be. It's a place, a day of being rather than a day of doing. And when Thich Nhat Hanh talks about have a day of mindfulness and suggests it's going to be on Saturday, oh, am I happy. So you get to have a sense, yes, we want that. How are we going to go and get that? So there is this kind of catch-22. Kafka once said, the Messiah will come when he's no longer necessary. You hear that? So it means that we won't get bailed out, that we have to do it ourselves. And so we have to start talking about what suggestions that people have about how we should do it ourselves. And one of the ways in which they said was, well, all you need to do is follow the 613 commandments fully, and just as the rabbis have said, and follow that completely. And if all of us would do it this way, the Messiah would come. If Israel would keep 2 Sabbaths in a row, we would not have any trouble, the Messiah would come. This is in our tradition. Well, take a look how it happened in Iran. You know, the Shah and his profligate ways. And then there came a man who said, the reason is because you have never tried Islam yet. We have to have an Islamic Republic. And Khomeini, interesting name, or title, Ayatollah. It means the sign of Allah. You know, how do I know that there is a God? I look at Khomeini and I know. You get the idea? In that system, an Ayatollah is that kind of a person who is that model. And if you submit to the Sharia, to that law, everything will be right. Well, I can hear some people in Colorado Springs saying to us the same thing by saying, if only all people would accept Christ as their own personal Savior, that would bail us out. The second coming would be here. And even if you don't do it, the second coming is around the corner. And some people are going to get caught up in the rapture, and the rest of you are going to go down the pits. And if you have seen some of the novels that have been out describing that future history of how the rapture is going to take place. In Buddhism, there are some branches of Buddhism that speak about the Pure Land. A way, if you can think and dream about it, what would it be like if everybody were to accept that path, and if they would live it? What a wonderful possibility that would be. Now, there have been a number of people who had that moment of inspiration in which they felt, I am the Messiah. It's my job to do that. And we had in Judaism someone by the name of Sabbatai Tzvi, and another one, Jacob Frank. And when people talk about them, they call them false messiahs. I don't want to call them false messiahs. I don't think they sat down and said, how am I going to con all the people, you know? I believe a lot more that they had the inspiration, the vision, figuring that if it could go the way in which they saw it from their inflated consciousness at that moment, they could do it. I remember a young man in Manitoba who had gotten into those wonderful, wonderful, holy psychosis, you know, getting into that place where he saw it very clear. All he felt that he needed to do is to touch people, and if he would touch people, they would wake up, the flame in them would begin to glow, and each one would touch another person, and it would just flood the land. And he saw it so clear. I tried to tell him that he best go and do a retreat with the Trappist fathers and just calm down a little bit until we could talk about this some more. But no, he was so imbued with his inner process, as what they call a spiritual emergence happening to him, that the RCMP picked him up and he wound up in an institution, and it took a while until they let him out. Because the psychiatrists were not ready to allow for him to take back even the memory of the great vision that he had at that time. So when I look at those people who are called false messiahs, I don't want to call them false messiahs. I want to call them failed messiahs, you know. They tried, they didn't make it. And each time, as they try to make it, they figure, not only do they have to redeem us from the troubles of the world, they also have to redeem us from our traditions. That our traditions are too tight, that they are keeping us down too much, that if you can remove the boundaries, if you can begin to live today how you expect to live when the Messiah comes, then you would be able to bring this about. And so therefore, the same laws that were seen in biblical and other religious laws that always say, no, 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 no. If you can remove them, that moment freedom comes, and feeling good comes, and ecstasy, and enlargement, and so on. It may be only temporary, and it may also create all kinds of heavy karma. And in fact, in the case of Sabbatai Tzvi and Jacob Frank, it did do just that. Created a lot of difficult karma that we had to climb out from. So after a while, it got to the place that the question about how could you possibly envision one person to be able to do it? In 1949, long time ago, I wrote a little science fiction story and submitted it to the Orthodox Jewish Life, a little magazine. It was called Shalashudas on the Moon, in which I described the thing that here they had discovered how to make a cosmic energy bomb. It was during the time that they were building the hydrogen bomb, you know. And where are they going to try it out? And people warned them, don't do it here on this planet because it's going to, you know, it's going to be blowing up the whole thing. So they suggest it should be done on the moon, you know. Anyway, so I go on in this story, and finally that person, the Messiah, comes when he sees that nobody knows how to deal with the new situation in which the moon brings us light and the sun brings us light, and you have two harvests, and springs are coming up in the Sahara Desert and in the Gobi Desert, and you have now all the harvests that you need to feed a whole hungry world, you know. Wonderful science fiction story. But the point was still in my mind that this had to do with an individual coming who's going to bail us out. A little bit later, when people would talk to me about the Messiah, I would say, how would I know who he is? I said, for me, the litmus test would be, I'd like to ask his wife, did she think he was Messiah? You know? And why is that? Because I've seen only too often that all those people who are doing those great things and want to save the whole world, and don't save themselves, and don't save their families, don't save their kids. So, you know, it's a problem. But, so I feel this would be the litmus test of who would deserve to do it. So at one point, after this happened, the other rabbi teacher died in 1950. His successor came and brought with himself another message, how imminent is the coming of the Messiah. And in fact, some of his followers thought that he was the Messiah himself, even to this point that they say that after he died, he's due to rise in the resurrection and do the redeeming that is our due at this time. There were some sociologists you were craning, so I'll stand up so you can see me better. All right. They were in Minneapolis in Minnesota at the university, and they decided they wanted to have an opportunity of seeing what is it like when prophecy fails. So they got some people of their group to infiltrate, to become members of a group that said, there are some flying saucers coming around, and our leader here is in touch with them telepathically. And at such and such a point, they're going to come down and they will pick us all up in their great spaceships, and they will take us to other places that we couldn't even imagine, and that will be saving the whole business. When will that be? They had a time even set. So these sociologists were very eager to see what was going to happen. They didn't think it was going to go that way, and I tell you, I have a certain disdain for people who want me to believe that the guys who have such wonderful technology that they can doodle around here, around the planet here, and they're quick, you know, in their ships and everything else, that they couldn't find a better way to communicate with us except by finding one person who's telepathic with them, you know. You know, I don't give a lot of credence to that. I figure that if they were that good, they could make, like, you know, when you go to Disneyland, and there you go through this thing. It's a small world after all, right? And through everything that you go, you hear a new melody, and you hear, it's the same melody, the same rhythm, but it has, here it sounds like Southeast Asia, and here it sounds like this, and here it sounds like that. So could you imagine a broadcast coming that would cover America in one way, you know, if these guys are so good, they could do that. So that's one of the reasons why I don't quite believe it. But anyway, so what happened was they came to that hilltop and they didn't show. And this is where the book, When Prophecy Fails, really becomes important, because there they spell out all the twists and turns that the people have made for themselves, trying to say, how are we going to deal with this? Well, we got an update, you know. It's not this week, it's going to be a little bit later. And you get to see that this comes still from the same notion, the same feeling that we have to expect somebody to come, a deus ex machina, to come and bail us out. Well, that movement ran into the sand after a while. People quit, because it didn't happen. So the notion of a personal, individual Messiah was weakened for me. I didn't expect that anymore. But I asked myself, isn't there a process that's been happening in some way? Because haven't we advanced about some things We may have gone back on some other things, but we have advanced in some things. When I think about polio and how we have managed to bring the Messiah for polio, how in most situations there is no more the same kind of slavery that there was before. I'm seeing issues about a Messiah coming in a much more gradual way. A little bit here and a little bit there. And when I think of Move On last week, that here just a few, if you will, simple people who've gotten together and used the internet to be able to bring about a change of awareness, I want to say, little by little, the Messianic thing is beginning to happen. So, but how did people envision that? So I want to go a little bit about utopias. Well, and the lemonade trees and the dun 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 dun, so the water fountain, So people had a whole idea of how this was going to be, that things will grow on trees for us and we won't have to work, and that's a good future that we might expect. Well, it isn't too far from the stories that were told before. But wait, every time you look at Erewhon, all such places where Erewhon goes nowhere, yeah? Utopia means the same kind of thing. It isn't in a particular place, it hasn't happened yet. But where has it happened? In our dreams it has happened. There are dreams that come, like Aldous Huxley talked about. These are not the black and white dreams of everyday flotsam and jetsam that we get at night. But there are dreams that are in technicolor with high spires and with great visions and so on and so forth. And when you get to such dreams, you get a feeling, yes, there is a possibility, and how would I put it? Goethe, at the end of his Faust, has a line in which he says, Das ewig Weibliche zieht uns hinan. The eternally feminine draws us close. So let me spell this one out. What happened is he sold his soul to the devil, Dr. Faust, and the devil was supposed to get it when he says, now I've had it all. And he didn't figure that at the end he will say, no, I haven't had it all, there's still more, there's still more. Why is there still more? Because the eternal feminine draws us on. This is just a wonderful phrase. It keeps saying that how would I put it? Could you imagine that humankind on the planet is like a woman who hasn't had an orgasm yet and has been teased all the time? Get that? That sense of saying, I haven't had my fulfillment yet, we haven't had our fulfillment yet, and yet we know it is waiting, but it's just at the threshold, and why have we not been able to experience that? Why have we not been able to get to that place of the total giving self and receiving, when this is such a wonderful hope and possibility? When I think of the times that we do have the Sabbath, and on Sabbath afternoon, the shadows lengthen, the day gets to an end. Now the day is over, like there's a wonderful Protestant hymn. I'm trying to remember the Latin counterpart when the day is over almost. And they're talking about that time, what's the mood that prevails? It's a mood that invites vision. It's a mood that invites saying, how will this be? How could we do this? With what will we leave the Sabbath and go into the week, and what is for us to do as a result of that? A colleague of mine, Arthur Waskow, took a phrase that was found in the Talmud, which says, hilchata lemishicha. Sometimes the rabbis in the Talmud are arguing about what is the rule and what is the law. And then they say, well, this is a rule and law for our time, but when the Messiah comes, we will have a different rule and law. So it is a law that will be to the Messiah, at the Messiah. He interprets it. If you want the Messiah to come, begin to go out of the accepted norms and live on a deeper level, beyond the accepted norms. And if you begin to live on that level, you can make changes. $1960 something, you know. We are in Berkeley. We are in San Francisco. What a wonderful time that was, you know. Yes, tune in, drop out, you know, come to your senses. You know, leave that way of doing business like every day. That's not going to help. And people would say, can't we all live together? Can't we create a commune? And those were wonderful hopes that people had of what it would be like if we lived in the commune. Books would came out, the Harad experiment, you know. At that time we saw mostly the trouble is that we have those sexual boundaries and we can't live fully according to the urges that we have. If only we could make love, then we wouldn't be making war, and so on. So there's a little truth in that too, you know. I could imagine that that if I could take most of the people maybe the voice of the Messiah is coming back. And we were to ask them, have you got a good, you know, talking to Rumsfeld, etc., you know, have you had a good sex situation lately? The likelihood is that they would say no. So there was that feeling that if people could only live that thing, that this would be so wonderful. What happened was they didn't count on the shadow cost, and there was all kinds of karma involved, and it didn't work out so well. And it also played into manipulation and so on and so forth. The Messiah hadn't come then. About, what is it now, over 100 years ago, in the 1830s, around that time, there was this great revival in America. And people had this, something was sweeping through like a wind, like a storm, that said, if you can get it right, if you can believe right, and if you go with the right people in the right church, and so on and so forth, and denominations jumped up, and there were Millerites, and then what were they, Wilburites, and the Hutterites got started, and the Amish were here, and there was Oneida community, and there were the Shakers, and whatever you had was that people said, maybe we can't do it on a grand scale, maybe we can, but could we possibly do what we need to do in an intentional community where we will spend the time that is necessary to work with consensus, where we will spend the time to also help each other. Because, you know, when somebody says, give up your ego, I'm worried about my pocketbook. You know, but what would be if someone says, you've got problems with your ego, come on, let's see if you can be in safe and sacred space. Could you relax a little bit? You know, if you don't have to be so defended, would that be all right? Could we create a community of people who will so live that we don't have to be so armored all the time? And you get the sense that that would be a good step. You're getting warm, you know, you're getting warm. Such a community is important, such a community is necessary. And I want to give credit to Naropa for engaged Buddhism, because what this is trying to say is, how can we bring this into the world? I remember when somebody told me, when I was here in 75, that, hey, did you hear, I mean, this guy, Trump, He's even saying that the Buddhists should get in the Chamber of Commerce. And he was saying this in such a way, as trying to get me on his side, saying how silly, how foolish that is. But for me, this was just a wonderful indication that he means it, If it doesn't get to the corporation, if it doesn't get into the boardrooms, if it doesn't get to the Chamber of Commerce, it's not going to happen there. And when, I think it's Paul Ray who's been talking about how there are so many people who are different heads of corporations who don't dare to come out with their real inner holy vision because they're afraid they're going to get canned and they're not going to be liked this way. But I think there is a revolution coming. There is a hope coming. And for this, I have hope. Against that hope, there is a realist, a cynic, who comes and says, come on, this is not the way it's going to be. Mazel tov. Now I know who the Messiah is. Let me quiet him down a little bit. He was whispering in my pocket. So coming back, where was I?
Revolution happening.
Pardon?
The cynic.
The cynic, that's right. So the cynic keeps on pointing out that it'll never happen, that the only way in which you can do things is not by partnering with the universe, not by partnering with nature. You only have to always control it, overcome it, and so on and so forth. And that there has to be an elite that will be in charge of these things. And what these people don't realize is that they're still working on a model that is a model of a machine, instead of seeing it on the model of an organism. And so in all the things that I've been saying during this time, and I will be saying for the next little while when we have those sessions here, is that we have to change. The first series that I had, I called it, in my mind at least, the Catechism for Gaian Initiation. If you want to be a part of this living body of earth, then there has to be another way of seeing yourself, not as the top of the situation, but as integral. When I see the way in which Ken Wilber wants to bring that to us about integral vision, that's wonderful. When I start asking the question, how can we communicate better with the overall system in which we are part of, the answer would then be that ultimately, whatever that Messiah is that has to come, that state of mind that has to come, it would have to come out of a situation in which we are telepathic with each other. And right now, if I were to say, would you all at this moment lower your resistance, open all your ports so that people could come in and out and experience that? What would you say? Not so fast, Some things I'm not ready to share yet. But I've experienced the situation whenever you go to a support group or you come to AA and so on and so forth, you find that when people can share those dark things, what happens is they find out that the stuff that I have is like the stuff that they have. It ain't so special, and so you might as well level. People still think that they can keep secrets. And when we remember back in the time when the embassies were trying to guard themselves so that people won't be able to read off the window panes what's being discussed inside, because the technologies have created so much transparency. Could you imagine, and I'm still struggling with this, could you imagine what it would be like if we could be open to our truth with each other? It may not always be pleasant to hear and to give the truth that we have, but it so well informs us, it so well tells us, it gives us guidance how we might be able to do it. So I do believe that if we could create the mind move for ourselves and for other people, to be able to see things from the higher and a better vantage point, which is an integral one, which is an organismic one, which says, I am not myself, but I am a cell of the global brain. I belong to that, and I don't want to be a cancer on it. What a difference this would make. And if corporations would see themselves giving service rather than looking at the bottom line, looking for 7 generations from now, what will the impact be? I mean, you know, I'm not telling you anything new. You're reading the same things that I do and you have the same feelings. The question is, we haven't yet learned, we've gotten to a very high place in transpersonal psychology, but the transpersonal sociology and transpersonal politics, transpersonal economics, we haven't gotten to that yet. So if I were to say, what would be a place into which we should invest research and money here, I think I would want to invest research and money into how to be able to create conflict resolutions, even with recalcitrant people, you know, so you don't have to bomb Iraq, but be able to convince Saddam to change his ways. It looks so, we think it's impossible, but it's because our imagination has put a limit on that. If we could open ourselves to this and say, no, you can overcome recalcitrance. There is even in the Saddam Hussein and even in the Hitler, there is a point in which there's a false messianic thing happening in leadership. And if we could just turn this around in some way, if we could affect it. And one of the things that I believe would be necessary would be to gather the adepts of this world who can work on a subtle plane to be able to influence things. I often offered a model of people who play curling, and then you see the people with the broom sweeping, which is to help make a shift in the karma that is already happening in the planet. I'm going to come in for a landing now. With a story. Fariduddin Ibn Attar, a Sufi poet from Iran, and I wish the people in Iran would listen to it too, and us, tells a story. The birds had gotten it that there is a way to solve all the problems. But what they need to do is have a conference of the birds, and that's the title of the book, The Conference of the Birds. They come together and they're looking for a bird, a big, big bird called a simurg. And he doesn't show up, but all the prophecies have said that the simurg will show up. And so they're there and they don't know what to do. And finally, the word is, well, he hasn't shown, we gotta give up. And so all the birds take to the air, and in the manner in which geese, fly in a certain arrangement with each other, they took to the air, and then they looked down at the shadow that they made, and they saw that they all together had made the shadow of the big bird. They were the simurg. And I have the feeling that this is a remarkable story. So this is the story we got to keep in mind. I can't do it for you. You can't do it for me. But together we can do it. There's only one way to get it together, and that's together. So let's bow out.